A girl gave her last meal to a homeless man, and the stranger who witnessed it turned out to be a millionaire with a life-changing offer. The winter light slanted through the towering glass windows of Marlowe and Sons Global, painting long streaks of gold across the office floor. It was Anna Whitmore's fourth day on the 22nd floor, and already she moved with a quiet urgency that stood apart from the self-assured chatter of her colleagues. Her desk was modest, squeezed between the break room and the photocopier, but she kept it impeccably tidy, as though the absence of clutter might shield her from scrutiny. She was printing reports for a team meeting when it happened. A voice, harsh, mocking, pierced the low hum of office activity. "Do you even know how to use that thing? Or do they not cover that in Broom School?" Anna paused mid-step, paper still warm in her hand. Around the corner, just out of sight, the night janitor, a man named Greg who moved slowly from arthritis and rarely spoke above a whisper, stood frozen, mop in hand, in front of one of the junior analysts. It was the kind of moment that offices were trained to ignore. A passing cruelty. A joke, if you asked the right people. But something in Anna refused silence. She walked into the hallway without hesitation. "That's enough," she said, voice calm but unflinching. The analyst turned, caught off guard. "Excuse me? I said that's enough?" Anna's tone didn't rise, but it cut sharper than any shout. "You're talking to a man who makes this office function. Maybe thank him for that." Greg looked down, embarrassed, clutching the mop like a shield. The analyst scoffed, muttered something about people being too sensitive, and walked away. Anna stayed long enough to offer Greg a small nod. He didn't say anything, just gave her a quiet, grateful glance before shuffling down the hall. What she didn't notice, what none of them noticed, was that someone else had paused nearby. He was holding a coffee he hadn't yet sipped, standing half in shadow, half in disbelief. Alexander Stone, founder and CEO, had stepped out of his corner suite to take a call. The call had ended. But he hadn't gone back inside. He had seen it, all of it. In a company where deference was currency, where silence often equaled strategy, Anna's voice had rung out like a bell in a cathedral. He didn't know her name yet, only that she wasn't one of his executive assistants or legal analysts. She was new, that much he could guess by the badge lanyard still slightly stiff with packaging folds. But something about her presence refused to be ordinary. Back in his office, Alexander sat behind his steel-framed desk and stared out at the Manhattan skyline. The city pulsed with ambition and silence, the same silence that had built his empire. He picked up his phone and typed a brief note to HR. "Who is the new hire near the third-floor printer station? Assigned desk near the break room. Find out her name." The reply came within minutes. "Anna Whitmore. Admin temp for compliance. Started Monday." Alexander stared at the name. He didn't recognize it, didn't recognize her, and yet he had a feeling that he would remember both far longer than he expected. Anna noticed it first on Thursday, the small change in routine. A sleek envelope, labeled in blue ink, waited on her desk when she arrived. Inside was a simple memo: "Please deliver these updates to my office before 10:30 a.m. A. Stone." It wasn't signed, save for the initials. No one else in compliance ever interacted with Alexander directly, let alone received personal requests. She reread the note twice, uncertain if it had reached her in error. But she delivered the updates anyway. And when she stepped into the executive hallway for the first time, her steps slowed almost involuntarily. The walls bore no plaques or art, only silence and precision. His office door was ajar. "Come in," he said without looking up. She placed the folder on his desk. "These are the updates, sir. You asked for them?" He looked up at her then. The same calm, composed man the business press had dubbed the quiet strategist. But today, something softened in his expression, a flicker of recognition. "You're the one who spoke up last Tuesday." Anna blinked. "Excuse me?" "In the hallway. With the janitor." "Oh," she said, suddenly wishing she had phrased it more tactfully. "I didn't mean to cause trouble. It just didn't feel right to ignore it." Alexander leaned back in his chair, studying her. You didn't cause trouble, he said finally. You reminded me what accountability looks like. He dismissed her with a nod, but as she turned to go, he added, How long is your contract? 3 months, she replied, pausing in the doorway. Let me know if you're interested in staying longer. That was all. No smile, no further comment. Just a new detail written into her story, an interaction she couldn't quite explain. Over the following week, more notes arrived. Requests that could easily have been handled by others, printing documents, gathering quarterly metrics, even finding archival reports that hadn't been touched in years. She did them all without question, assuming some audit or executive need was behind them. What she didn't know was that Alexander often waited until she left before reviewing the materials. He didn't need them immediately. Sometimes he didn't need them at all. But the quiet way she entered, focused and unassuming, gave him a few minutes of clarity that had grown rare in his world. He didn't understand it. He didn't seek it. But it persisted. At lunch, Anna sat with Michelle from accounts, who had a habit of lowering her voice whenever someone in a blazer walked by. You know who you remind me of? Michelle said one afternoon, stirring her tea with mechanical rhythm. People who still believe decency matters. I thought everyone did, Anna said, meaning it. Michelle laughed without humor. Not in this building. Later that week, Anna's shift ran past 6. She stayed to recompile a set of files misformatted by someone else. She didn't complain, just worked quietly under the fluorescent hum of the nearly empty floor. And that was when Alexander saw her again. He was leaving his office late, coat over one arm, when he noticed the light still glowing from the break room end of the floor. A familiar silhouette sat upright in a chair, her screen reflecting off the glass as her fingers moved across the keyboard. He stood there for a long moment, unseen, then walked away. That night, as he entered the elevator, his reflection stared back at him. For a man who commanded mergers and global valuations, he never once noticed how often he felt like a stranger in his own building. Until someone, a temp with a steady voice, had broken the rhythm. Friday morning, a bouquet appeared on Anna's desk. Not extravagant. Just precise, winter jasmine, tucked into white paper with no card. She looked around, perplexed. Secret admirer? Someone teased in passing. Anna smiled politely, but her thoughts didn't settle. She set the flowers gently in a mug and resumed her work, trying not to overthink it. She wouldn't know, not yet, that Alexander had passed a florist's shop the night before on his walk home, a walk he hadn't taken in years. He hadn't intended to stop. But something in the display caught his eye, quiet, unassuming blossoms growing stubbornly through frost. He didn't ask for a card. Some messages didn't need words. It happened on a Wednesday, the kind of day designed to be forgettable. Rain streaked the floor-to-ceiling windows. The building's usual quiet had thickened into something more suffocating, as if even the walls were waiting for something to happen. Anna arrived just before 8, as she always did. She noticed the shift in energy immediately, glances held too long, voices that hushed when she passed. The elevator ride to the 22nd floor felt unusually slow. At her desk, a thin envelope waited. Not from Alexander. This one bore the stark lettering of legal. Please report to room 4B at 10 a.m., internal review. Her stomach dropped. She hadn't done anything, not that she could think of, but the wording, the timing, the silence all felt ominous. She checked the calendar. No scheduled audits. No compliance reviews. Nothing that explained why legal had summoned a temporary assistant. Across the hall, Michelle wouldn't meet her eye. By 9:59, Anna was sitting in a windowless conference room with 3 people she had never met. One read from a file. Another watched her, expressionless. The third remained silent, fingers steepled. We've received information, said the first man. That confidential performance data from the January portfolio was leaked to a third-party firm. That file passed through your workstation 2 days ago. Anna blinked. That file was routed to me by Mr. Stone's office. I reformatted it and returned it. And you didn't send it to anyone else? Of course not. The second woman leaned forward. Then how do you explain this? She slid across a printed screenshot, an email thread from an external address, referencing specific metrics from the report. The dates matched. The contents matched. The sender's email, however, was unfamiliar. I didn't send this, Anna said. Her voice cracked slightly. Someone's using my name. Your credentials access the server. I leave my terminal unlocked sometimes, she admitted, and immediately regretted the honesty. But only when stepping away for a minute. It's not. We'll be reviewing your system activity logs in full. You're not suspended, but you are restricted from accessing internal reports until this matter is resolved. The meeting ended with no further discussion. She walked out in a daze. The rain had stopped, but her hands were cold. At her desk, people avoided her entirely now. She didn't cry. She didn't defend herself to coworkers who wouldn't hear it. She just sat quietly, staring at the files on her screen that no longer mattered. It wasn't until 11:45 that Alexander heard. He was mid-call with the London office when Rachel, his assistant, stepped in without knocking, a breach she'd never once made in 5 years. Anna Whitmore, she said quietly. She's being accused of leaking internal reports. I thought you'd want to know. Alexander didn't respond right away. He ended the call, set his phone down slowly, and stared out the window. Legal? Rachel nodded. Apparently something was traced to her login. He said nothing. But Rachel, who knew the subtle shifts in his face better than most, saw something rare: doubt. Not in Anna. In himself. Get me everything, he said. Now. That evening, Anna sat alone in the break room. It was after 7. The office was nearly empty. Her badge access would be revoked any day now, she knew it. She couldn't eat. Couldn't think beyond the growing blur of helplessness. That's when Alexander entered. She didn't look up until he set a folder down beside her. I found this in the server logs, he said quietly. It proves the access came from a clone terminal on the 24th floor. Someone piggybacked your credentials. You were framed. Anna blinked. Framed? He nodded once. Jealousy, I assume. You've drawn attention. Not all of it kind. For a long moment, she just stared at the folder. Then finally, she exhaled. Her shoulders sagged, and her hands trembled as they gripped the table. Why did you believe me? She asked. His voice didn't soften, but his words did. Because you didn't even try to plead your case. She looked up. What does that mean? It means, he said, that people who lie try harder to sound innocent. You just sounded exhausted. The next morning, the head of legal issued a quiet apology. The investigation was closed. Anna's access was restored. The incident, they said, had been a misunderstanding. But Alexander made sure the responsible party was dismissed, quietly, without spectacle. And Anna? Anna didn't cry. She didn't celebrate. She just went back to work. But something in her had shifted. She caught herself glancing toward the executive wing more often, wondering if she'd see him. And Alexander? He started walking the floor more often. Just in case. 2 weeks passed. The scandal faded like a bad dream, but its imprint lingered in the way people treated Anna. Some looked at her with a new, wary respect. Others, with quiet discomfort, as if proximity to disgrace, even falsely earned, left a mark. Anna felt it too. A subtle shift in her posture, the way she measured her words more carefully, kept her head down just a little more. But not with him. Alexander had changed something in her. Or perhaps revealed something she hadn't let herself see, the luxury of being truly seen, without needing to explain or defend. Their encounters remained rare and brief, a glance in the elevator, a soft, thank you, over a file he didn't really need, but there was something now in those silences. A shared pause. A question neither dared speak aloud. And then came the board meeting. It was the quarterly strategy review, high stakes, combative, and political. Anna had been asked to prepare presentation packets, but nothing more. That changed an hour before the meeting began, when Rachel appeared at her desk. "Mr. Stone wants you to assist inside." Anna blinked. Inside the boardroom? He was very clear. Anna had never even seen the inside of the boardroom. It was a fortress, guarded by glass and status, and she was certain that stepping into it would feel like trespassing. It didn't. Not when she walked in and saw him, Alexander, seated at the head of the table, calm and unreadable. He gave her the smallest nod. Halfway through the meeting, one of the directors brought it up. "I trust the leak issue from last quarter has been fully resolved?" asked Nolan Hart, Chief Risk Officer. His voice had the smooth edge of someone who never trusted anyone but liked to make it sound polite. Alexander looked up. "It has. Internal resolution?" "Yes." "And the employee?" Hart's gaze drifted to Anna, who had tried to make herself invisible against the far wall. "Still with the company?" Alexander didn't even blink. "Yes." There was a long pause. Someone shifted in their chair. "You're aware of the optics," Hart added. "I'm aware," Alexander said, "that when an employee is falsely accused, the failure is not theirs. It's ours. And until I see board-level accountability for mistakes made in judgment, I don't want to hear another word about optics." Hart's expression didn't change. But the room did. The air shifted. Respect carried its own sound when spoken plainly. Anna didn't breathe until the meeting ended. She waited until everyone else had left. Then, gently, uncertainly, she stepped forward. "I didn't expect you to defend me like that." Alexander didn't rise from his chair. He just looked at her, the quiet steadiness of his gaze more disarming than anything he'd said that day. "I told the truth," he said. "Not for you. For the record." Anna nodded. But before she could turn to leave, he said something else. "My father built this company like a castle, high walls, thick rules, no room for weakness. I've spent most of my life trying not to become him." She turned back. "I don't trust easily," he admitted. "And when I do, I test it. Sometimes without realizing it. That day in the hallway, with Greg, it reminded me of something I'd forgotten." "What's that?" she asked. "That you don't have to trust someone to respect them. But without respect, trust isn't worth anything." The room was quiet. He didn't ask her to stay longer. She didn't try to. But later that night, when Anna passed the janitor again, Greg, still slow-moving, still silent, he gave her a quiet nod that felt deeper than thanks. And that evening, alone in her apartment, Anna found herself replaying every word from the boardroom. Not because of what he said, but because of what he didn't. There was a truth there, beneath the surface, that neither of them had touched yet. But it was coming. It was raining again, a hard, unrelenting rain that turned Manhattan into 1,000 reflections. The kind of weather that made people rush through intersections with their collars up and eyes low. But Alexander Stone didn't rush. He stood under the awning of a coffee shop near Bryant Park, watching the storm like it was something he didn't mind standing in. Across from him, Anna sat at a small, corner table, her hands wrapped around a mug that had long since gone cold. This wasn't work. This wasn't requested. This was something else. "Why did you ask to meet here?" she asked, her voice soft but steady. Alexander glanced at the window, where the rain painted blurred lines over the world outside. "Because this place doesn't belong to the company." Anna's brows lifted slightly. "And that matters?" "It does to me." There was a long pause. Not uncomfortable. Just honest. She stirred her coffee, though there was nothing left to dissolve. "You could have fired me," she said finally. "It would have been easier. I didn't want easy." She looked at him then, not the CEO, not the man who signed off on billion-dollar ventures, but a person. Tired. Unusually quiet. Less guarded than she'd ever seen him. "I used to think strength meant distance," he said. "Controlling what people saw. Choosing who got close." "Doesn't it?" she asked. "Maybe. But it's lonely." The honesty landed like a stone between them. Not dramatic. Just real. Anna exhaled, setting her mug down carefully. You said once that you test people when you start to trust them. He nodded. She looked at him, not with judgment, but with something close to understanding. Then let me ask you something. This, whatever this is. Am I being tested? Or seen? The question silenced him. For once, Alexander Stone didn't have an answer prepared. He looked down, then back at her. You're the only person I've met in years who makes me question how I've been living. She didn't smile. But something behind her eyes shifted. A gentleness. A clarity. You're not the only one, she said. That week, their dynamic changed, not publicly, not obviously. But in the small ways that mattered. Alexander no longer sent requests to Rachel. He came himself. Anna no longer stood when he entered the room. They began to speak more plainly, more personally. Brief remarks about their days, their pasts. He told her once about his mother, how she'd left when he was 12, and how no one in his family ever talked about it. She shared that her father had died when she was 15, and how grief taught her silence before it taught her strength. No declarations. No confessions. Just layers. And yet neither of them named what was happening. Until the gala. It was a charity event, one of those mandatory corporate affairs with too much lighting and not enough sincerity. Anna wasn't supposed to be there. She had helped with the logistics, the guest list, the name tags. But she hadn't planned to attend. She changed her mind at the last moment. And when she walked into the ballroom, dressed simple but elegant, eyes scanning for an exit plan, she didn't expect Alexander to find her. You came, he said. I wasn't going to. Why did you? She hesitated. To see if it mattered. He looked at her, and something in his expression softened, the way glass does when it stops trying to be a mirror. It does, he said quietly. It does to me. And then, in front of 100 glittering guests, and a dozen watching board members, Alexander Stone did something he never did. He offered her his hand. No one else noticed the shift. But she did. Because in that moment, for the first time, he wasn't leading a company. He was choosing a person. And Anna, after a pause that stretched longer than it should have, took it. There was a door at Marlowe and Sons that few people noticed. It sat at the end of the west hallway, unmarked, opposite a glass wall overlooking the Hudson. Most assumed it was a server room, or a defunct archive space, some forgotten corner of a building too large for its own memory. It wasn't. It was Alexander's retreat. His unlisted sanctuary. He took Anna there one evening, not with fanfare or ceremony, just a quiet, "Come with me," spoken in passing after most of the office had emptied. She followed without question. Inside, the room held no screens, no whiteboards, no sign of business. Just a long wooden table, bookshelves filled with biographies and historical journals, and a single lamp in the corner casting golden light across polished stone floors. She stepped inside slowly. "This isn't what I expected," she said. "I know." He sat on the edge of the table, not at it. There were no chairs in the room. "When I was younger," he began, "my father told me that leadership was about distance. Never let them see you tired, he used to say. Never let them see you hesitate. I built this place to remind myself that he was wrong." Anna leaned lightly against the shelf. She didn't interrupt. "I come here when I feel it slipping," he said. "The line between who I am and who I pretend to be." She looked at him then, really looked. He was wearing the same tailored suit, the same watch, the same impassive expression the world had come to expect. But up close, she could see the lines around his eyes. The way his hands curled slightly at rest, like they still remembered how to brace for impact. "This room is where you stop performing," she said. He nodded. "I haven't brought anyone here before." She didn't ask why. She didn't need to. Instead, she asked, "What made you change?" Alexander looked at her, not startled, not afraid. Just quiet. "You did." Later, back in her apartment, Anna sat on the edge of her bed, shoes still on, coat still clutched loosely in her hands. She wasn't sure what to call what had happened. It wasn't romantic. Not exactly. There had been no declarations. No touches. But something had cracked open between them. And it terrified her. She had spent most of her life staying small enough to survive, in jobs, in relationships, in moments where it was safer to stay silent than be wrong. But now, someone who could destroy her with a sentence had chosen to be human with her instead. And she had let him. The following week, their rhythm changed again. There was more eye contact now. More pauses that felt like they wanted to become something else. One afternoon, Anna found a post-it on her desk in Alexander's handwriting. When trust becomes a habit, courage follows. No name. No context. Just that. And then came the shareholders' dinner. She hadn't planned on attending. Her name wasn't on the list. But at the last moment, Rachel, always a step ahead, handed her an envelope. "He added you," she said, voice low. "Under strategic advisement." Anna opened the card. The ink was handwritten, simple. "I'd like you there." No expectation. Just truth. She stared at it for a long time. The event was held at a historic townhouse near Gramercy. Stone columns, chandeliered halls, a guest list that read like a Forbes spread. She wore black, understated, classic. She told herself she was just there to observe. But when Alexander saw her across the room, his gaze lingered. He didn't smile. He never smiled in public. But his posture shifted. Just slightly. The way it might if a person finally allowed themselves to breathe. Later, as the speeches dragged on and the waitstaff cleared their third course, he found her near the terrace. "I wasn't sure you'd come," he said. "I wasn't sure I should." He looked at her. "Does it feel wrong?" "No," she said without hesitation. "It feels different." Alexander nodded slowly. Then, in a voice so quiet it was nearly lost beneath the sound of glasses clinking in conversation, he said, "I've spent most of my life fearing the wrong kind of closeness. But lately, I'm starting to fear distance more." Anna didn't answer. She didn't need to. Because he had said everything. And for now, that was enough. For a week, they didn't speak outside of meetings. There were no post-its. No shared glances. Just business, clean and precise. But beneath it, something had shifted. And neither of them could pretend otherwise. It wasn't avoidance, not quite. It was a kind of waiting. A silent agreement to not rush a truth that was still stretching awake between them. Then, on a Tuesday evening, long after most had left the building, Anna got a message. "If you're still here, come to the roof. I need air." No signature. No subject line. Just that. She hesitated only a second before taking the private elevator, the one rarely used by anyone not wearing a title. The rooftop was empty. The city pulsed below in 1,000 windows, each lit life a universe of its own. Alexander stood near the edge, coat unbuttoned, hands in his pockets. The wind pushed his hair slightly out of place, something she'd never seen before. "You okay?" she asked, when she was close enough for him to hear. "No," he said quietly. "But I think I will be." She didn't answer. She didn't move to fill the silence. Just waited. And eventually, the words came. "My father died 2 years ago," he said. "Heart failure. Fast. Clean. He left everything to the company, right down to the cufflinks I never wore." "I'm sorry," she said softly. He nodded, still watching the skyline. "I wasn't." Anna's breath caught slightly, but she let him keep going. "He built everything with control. Power. Reputation. The family was just a side effect, something to be tolerated. He didn't trust softness. Called it weakness. Said love was leverage in someone else's hands." "And you believed him?" she asked. "I did. For too long." He turned then, eyes tired but honest. "And now I find myself standing here, with someone who makes me feel every emotion I was taught to suppress. And I don't know how to manage that." Anna stepped closer, close enough to feel the weight of his presence. She could see now that what others called composure in him was something far more fragile, not a fortress, but a balancing act. "You don't have to manage it," she said. "You just have to stop fighting it." Alexander looked at her. Really looked. And something behind his eyes cracked, not broken, but released. As if he'd been holding too much for too long. Then, in a moment that felt quieter than the wind itself, he said her name. "Anna." Just that. But with all the weight of everything unsaid. And she stepped into the space beside him, not because she had to, but because she chose to. The next day at work, nothing changed on the surface. There were reports. Memos. Meetings conducted with the same clipped precision as always. But in the corners of those interactions, the glance across a crowded table, the pause before a door closed, something had shifted. Trust had become visible. It didn't need definition. But not everyone approved. That afternoon, Rachel found her in the hallway. "You care about him," she said. Not a question. A statement. Anna hesitated. "I don't know what we are." Rachel gave a half smile. "That's not what I asked?" Anna looked down. "Yes," she said finally. "I care." Rachel exhaled slowly. "Then be careful." "I'm not afraid of him," Anna said. "It's not him I'm worried about," Rachel replied. "It's what this place does to people who forget the rules." That night, Anna lay awake for hours. Not with fear, but with the slow recognition that the world she'd built for herself, structured, practical, safe, had already shifted under her feet. She was falling for a man who never meant to notice her. A man who had spent years building walls so thick even he had forgotten what they were for. And he had opened the gate. She didn't know what would come next. But for the first time in her life, she wasn't bracing for the worst. She was hoping for more. It happened on a Sunday. The office was closed, the city half asleep in late winter haze, and yet Alexander's car was parked outside the building before the streetlights dimmed. He sat behind the wheel, engine off, coat still folded beside him. He didn't know why he'd come. Or maybe he did, and just didn't want to name it. He hadn't spoken to Anna since Thursday. She'd been quiet in the halls, professional in meetings. There was no coldness. Just space. Necessary space. But something inside him rebelled at it. Not out of entitlement, he knew better than to claim her attention. But out of the strange, burning need to be seen by her again. Heard. Understood. And he didn't know how to ask for that. Not until she called. Not a message. Not a scheduled update. A real call, voice low and hesitant. "Are you still at the office?" He didn't pretend he wasn't. "I'm downstairs," he said. There was a pause. Then, simply, "Come up." The lights were dim on the 22nd floor. Only the emergency track lighting ran along the edges of the ceiling. Anna stood near the large window overlooking the city, her silhouette outlined by the slow rhythm of distant traffic. She didn't speak right away. She didn't turn. He joined her at the glass. "I didn't expect to hear from you tonight," he said. "I know." Another long silence passed. "I couldn't sleep," she said eventually. "Too many things I haven't said." He nodded once. "Me too." She finally turned, arms folded loosely across her chest. Not defensive, just anchoring herself. "Do you regret it?" she asked. Alexander met her eyes. "No. I mean all of it. The rooftop. The room. The way we let things happen." "No," he said again. "Do you?" "I don't know." She hesitated, then took a deep breath. "I've worked hard my whole life to keep things simple," she said. "Clean lines. Predictable paths. And you." He waited. "You complicate everything." "I know. But," she added, "you also make me feel like I exist. Not as someone in the background. Not as an assistant or a role. Just a person." Alexander didn't move. His voice, when it came, was quieter than she'd ever heard it. I spent years perfecting the art of being needed without being known. She looked at him. And now? I don't want that anymore. There it was. The truth, bare and unguarded. She stepped closer, their distance narrowing to breath and heartbeat. Then why do I still feel like you're holding back? She asked. Like part of you is afraid I'll see something you don't want me to. He didn't answer immediately. Then, slowly, he reached into his coat pocket and withdrew something small, a photograph. Worn at the edges. Faded. It was of a boy. Maybe 12. Standing next to a man who looked nothing like Alexander but shared his jawline and the tension in his shoulders. This was the last picture taken of me and my father, he said. We were at a charity event. He had just given a speech about how his legacy would outlive him. Anna took the photo, carefully. He died thinking legacy meant control. Alexander continued. That power was measured by how untouched you could remain. How much of yourself you never had to share. He met her eyes. I've lived most of my life afraid I would become him. But I've also been afraid that if I wasn't him, I'd be nothing at all. Her voice was soft now, steady. You're not nothing. He looked away. You're the first person who's ever told me that and meant it. She reached out, not for reassurance, but for something else, something braver. Her fingers brushed his hand. Not a touch meant to console. A choice. He didn't flinch. You don't have to become him to prove you're better, she said. You already are. He closed his eyes for a long moment. And when he opened them, something in him had changed. Not dramatically. Not with flourish. But deeply. He took her hand fully this time. Not out of instinct but intention. And she didn't let go. They left the building together that night. No one saw. No one needed to. The city kept moving, unaware that something had shifted on a quiet Sunday between two people who had stopped pretending. Alexander didn't take her home. He walked with her instead. Past the river. Past the frozen fountains near Battery Park. Neither of them said what this was. Neither of them labeled the way his shoulder brushed hers every few steps. Or the way she smiled faintly when he offered his coat without a word. It wasn't romance. Not yet. It was deeper than that. A recognition. That love, real love, begins not with fireworks, but with someone choosing to stay. Especially when they don't have to. It was just past 7:30 when Anna walked into the conference room on the 20th floor, summoned by a vague calendar invite simply titled Discussion. No sender listed. But she knew. Alexander was already there, not in his usual seat at the head of the table, but at the side, sleeves rolled, no tie, eyes not on the spreadsheet in front of him, but on the skyline beyond. She paused in the doorway. You're early, she said. He didn't turn. I've been here an hour. She stepped inside, letting the door shut behind her. I've been thinking, he said finally, about how easy it would be to let this, whatever this is, stay unspoken. Stay in the margins. And? She asked. I don't want that. He turned to face her. I want you to know exactly what this is. Anna pulled out the chair opposite him but didn't sit. Then tell me. Alexander's voice was careful, but certain. You've become the one person whose presence steadies me. Not because you admire me, or fear me, or need anything from me, but because you see the parts of me no one else bothers to. He looked down. His next words came slower. I used to think control made me safe. Then you walked in, brave enough to stand up for someone no one saw, and made me realize that safety isn't about control. It's about who you're willing to be vulnerable in front of. She sat now. Gently. Still watching him. I've spent so long building a life people envied. He continued. But I was alone in every room. Until you. Anna said nothing for a while. Her fingers traced the edge of the polished wood table. Then, you don't just fall into someone's life like this, Alexander. You rewrite it. He didn't smile. But there was something in his expression, a stillness, a gratitude too deep for words. She went on. When I started here, I didn't expect anything. I didn't want anything more than a quiet job and a quiet life. I'd convinced myself that was enough. But you made it impossible to stay hidden. Her voice was soft but firm. You made me want more. Not from the company. From myself. Outside, the last of the sun dipped behind the skyline. Inside, nothing moved but breath and truth. Alexander leaned forward. I want to build something real with you, Anna. Not behind closed doors. Not in secret. I want people to know what you are to me. She didn't answer immediately. Instead, she asked a question. Are you ready for what that means? For the headlines? The rumors? The board raising eyebrows because the CEO is in love with a woman who started at the printer station. He met her gaze without flinching. Yes, he said. Because I'm more afraid of losing you than all of that combined. Silence stretched between them. And then she reached across the table and took his hand. Not as a gesture of comfort. As an answer. Words spread within days. Quietly at first. Then with more momentum. Anna didn't change desks. She didn't suddenly wear expensive clothes or carry herself with any new sense of entitlement. She remained herself, calm, efficient, direct. But now, when she walked past executive offices, people nodded differently. Not with fear. With acknowledgement. And Alexander? He didn't hide it. He didn't explain it. But once, during a quarterly review, when a senior director made a thinly veiled remark about propriety, he paused. And said calmly, I'm proud of the people I choose to trust. And I trust Anna Whitmore more than anyone in this company. It wasn't defensive. It wasn't dramatic. But it ended the whispers. The proposal came 2 weeks later. Not on a rooftop. Not over candlelight. In the room with the bookshelves and no chairs. Alexander stood beside her, holding something small in his hand, not a box. Just a ring. No speech. Only this. I don't want to spend the rest of my life building empires if I'm doing it alone. And I don't want a future where you're just a chapter. Anna looked at the ring. Then at him. And then, without hesitation, without ceremony, she said, Yes. The wedding was private. Not secret, just quiet. A morning ceremony at a conservatory upstate, sunlight streaming through glass and green as if even nature had chosen to speak softly for once. There were no camera crews. No press. Just a dozen people who mattered, and one quiet vow spoken without amplification. I trust you with all the parts of me I used to keep hidden, Alexander said, his hand steady in hers. I don't need a promise of forever, Anna replied, voice clear. Just a promise that every day, we'll choose each other again. And so they did. They didn't move into a mansion. They bought a restored brownstone on the Upper West Side, old bones, quiet corners, a garden Anna filled with wildflowers no one ever tried to control. She still woke early, still made coffee the way she had when she worked 2 floors below the boardroom. The only difference now was that Alexander usually beat her to the kitchen. He had become softer, but not smaller. More certain, not louder. And every time he left the house, briefcase in hand, coat half-buttoned, he kissed her like it was still the first time he dared to admit he cared. At work, she took a new role. Not at his side, but alongside the people she once filed reports for. Director of Culture and Ethics. The title didn't impress her. But the work did. She implemented new grievance policies, changed hiring practices, and made sure no one, no matter how temporary, ever had to speak up for someone like Greg alone again. People called her the compass behind closed doors. She didn't care about that either. She only cared that it mattered. One evening in late spring, Anna stood at the window, watching the sun trace the fire escapes with gold. Her phone buzzed, a photo from Michelle, now managing her own team. In it, a new hire stood holding a framed certificate. First month of work completed. Still standing. Beneath the image was a message. She reminds me of you. Fierce. Quiet. Kind. Thank you for proving we could be more. Anna smiled. Behind her, Alexander walked in, loosened his tie, kissed her on the temple without speaking. He didn't have to. Later that night, as they sat on the back steps, a breeze moved through the vines Anna had trained to grow up the railing. She leaned into him, the silence full of everything they no longer needed to explain. You know, she said, it still surprises me how far we've come. Alexander didn't respond right away. Then, without looking at her, he said, I used to think success meant never depending on anyone. And now? He looked at her. Now I know it means never having to hide who you are. She rested her head on his shoulder. And for a long time, they said nothing. Because some endings don't need sound. Some endings, the real ones, are just beginnings.